So welcome to Newton's Laws of Music, MIDI edition, lesson 1. This lesson is going to have 4, maybe 5 sections, depending on how I feel. Section 1, which you are viewing now, is going to be on what I will call digital sheet music. And that is the way we're going to treat MIDI and the notes that have to do with MIDI. We're going to treat them as digital sheet music and digital notes. So we're going to go through a couple of points here, a couple of necessary points, talk about the different structures that we're looking at. So first thing we're looking at here is going to be different pieces of information like our BPM, our project time signature, our project key, of course, our project grid. In this case, we are going to be doing a 4-beat measure, which constitutes about 1 second, and as you can see that this will be a 4-beat measure. I'm going to go ahead and insert a MIDI track, so now you can see this will be our work area for this particular lesson. And I'm going to maximize this so we've got a good view of everything. So one of the first things I want to look at within this is the grid. And from within here you can set the grid spacing. Now to show that we are sitting at a measure in a 4/4 time signature, I'm going to select that as my option. Now what we have in our grid spacing are obviously now 4 4s, each measure going across. Each one obviously sitting at 1 second. So let's go ahead and set our grid spacing back to a 16th note. I'm going to expand this out ever so slightly, maybe a little too far there. Let's bring that back in by 1. Alrighty, so a couple of the other concepts we need to look at quickly within this. Obviously our loop section, I've set this so that when I play it, it will loop through this measure until I tell it to stop. So we basically have sitting here our loop section. A couple of the other things, obviously we're looking at a MIDI track. We're going to be looking at MIDI in and MIDI out. Currently, we're going to turn the MIDI in off because we're not going to be getting our MIDI process signal from outside of the computer. It's all going to be internal. And on the MIDI in or the MIDI out, I'm going to go ahead and insert a soft synth. Now I'm going to use Drop Zone from Cakewalk. Even though it's obvious I'm not using Cakewalk, a VSTI is a VSTI. And as you can see, now we have Cakewalk, the Cakewalk Drop Zone. So I'm going to select Default, and I'm going to use Bright Piano because I want to make sure that we're hearing everything. We will be talking about notes, scales, and chords. So I want to make sure that we're hearing it as a piano. But I am going to go ahead and move this out of our way. Now obviously you can tell when I created that soft synth as my MIDI out, it created a separate bus. So now we've got my master bus and we've got our drop zone bus. In a later lecture we'll probably start putting synth effects on these and doing other such things. So having a bus for each is definitely handy. I am going to again move this out of the way. So we've got our grid, we've got our loop section, we've got our MIDI track obviously, we've got our MIDI in, which is actually off at the moment, we've got our MIDI output, and you've seen the bus. Now at this point also we have gone through the soft synth that we're using, which is Drop Zone. We've also looked at our BPM, our time signature, and our project key. These are all important because as we start to talk about scales in MIDI, you'll know that we are in the key of C. And we have also gone ahead and selected the sound that we're going to use, or the filter, in the soft synth. Alright, so now we are on section 2. We're going to start looking at notes and scales. So in the last section we created our MIDI track. We talked through the BPM, time signature, and key that this particular MIDI track is going to be in. We also spoke about our MIDI input and our MIDI output. Now the next thing that we're going to do is within this, I've got my little pencil or my drawing tool. I'm going to draw a MIDI clip. Now, the MIDI clip is obviously where each one of the MIDI beats is going to go. But one of the other things that I need to do before I can do that is to enable inline MIDI editing. Now, when I enable inline MIDI editing, what you will see is I now have a piano roll. And the grids look a little different here, a little cleaner, different colors. You'll see as the notes are drawn, they will actually make a difference what these colors actually are. So the first thing we're going to do is go through a couple of key points. I've already shown you the draw tool. I'm going to also show you the paint tool and what the significance is between the two. One of the interesting things about the draw tool is the ability to select, the paint tool is the ability to select which notes we're going to paint. This allows for easy and quick painting of notes, whereas the draw tool will always give you a note the size of the grid, no matter what your grid is, but it also makes it easier to drag things around and other such tasks that you might need to do, so they both have their trade-offs. So for the first note I'm going to draw, I'm going to select the whole note. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click right at middle C. And as you can see, I just painted a whole note. Now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, give me a dotted half note. I'm going to go to the B and I'm going to draw that note. Now I'm going to do this all the way through. I'm not going to talk about each one that I'm doing, but I'm just going to go ahead and select each one through. Alright, so what you can see at this point is I have gone ahead and painted all of these tracks. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I just selected my select and move tool, and I'm going to go ahead and select each one of these notes and simply move them over. I know where I want them, but I also want to show you something. As I move them, the note changes, and you can see on the piano roll that the note changes. So as I do this with each one of these, I can make sure that I'm on the note that I want to be on. So as you can see, and obviously it has some flexibility there, as you can see, what I'm doing is setting up exactly where I want everything to be from root down. And so what we have done is we've drawn each one of these. Now you can see that obviously they're varying lengths in different positions, just like it would be under sheet music, but instead of a little note with a flag on it or a stem or whatever it might be depending on the note, these are just bars. Bars of varying lengths that fit within the grid to speak about what it is we're trying to do. Now I'm going to hit play. So now what you just heard was simply rolling through the scale, but because I'm using the different notes the way that I am, what this allows is for something that almost sounded like a little bit of a melody already. So at this point, that does conclude section 2. Alright, now we're on section 3. And in section 3 we are going to go ahead and talk about chords. Now, a couple of important points. Obviously, we're working on the C major scale, so the chords will exist within that scale. We're going to be using 16th notes in building our scales for the moment. And I'm also going to show you how to copy and paste various objects to make life a little bit easier. So as you can tell, I've created a second MIDI clip, again, no different than the first. Same time signatures, same key, same everything. Same piano roll even. And what I've also done is moved my looped region over to this clip so we can run through this one and hear the different sounds. Later we'll combine the two, but for now this is what we'll work on. And I'm going to use my little draw tool, my little pencil, because I know that I'm going to only be working in 16th notes for the moment. So your typical C major chord. So as you can see, we now have our basic C major chord. Each note, root, third, fifth, all 16th notes, all basically a 16th of a, or actually 1/4 of a beat of our 4-beat measure. So at this point, instead of going through and drawing each one, I'm going to select, copy, and then paste. Now what you can see is I have another set. I'm going to go ahead and move this up to right there. Now I'm going to continue this process, pasting more of these all the way through until I'm done with this particular area. Again, throughout this we are working in the C major scale. And obviously this is a lot easier than going in and having to draw each one of the notes. So here we have ascending up to middle C from a root of C, of course. At this point I'm actually going to go ahead and shrink this down just for time's sake. And I just want to hear what this sounds like. So as you just heard, we now have a rolling scale. This is all done 16th notes on a 16th note grid. I did cut this down to 2 beats, so technically we would be at a 2/4 instead of a 4/4, but that's okay. I got lazy, didn't feel like drawing the rest of them. But I think you've got the idea. That does conclude section number 3. Okay, on to section 4. This will be the last section of this lesson. What we're going to do is look at combining our two MIDI clips and seeing if we can't make a little bit of music. I know it's only going to be a 1/4-beat measure, but we're going to see what we can do with this. So I'm going to go ahead and select, and then paste that data in. Now at this time I'm no longer going to need this particular clip, so I'm going to get rid of it. I am then also going to move my loop region back, and then I'm going to start working with the data that I have right here. Now we're going to go ahead and run this down pretty low. And just like we did before, I'm going to go ahead and paste in some additional notes. But I'm going to do this in a way that's a little more, shall we say, melodic. Now, one of the things I did not show you before in the program that I'm using, which is Sony Acid Pro, every one of these little grid sections that I'm on, if you notice down here, the note is changing, and it's also telling me where it's at on the piano roll. So obviously this would then be a C sharp on the third section of the roll. And you can see as it goes up, that data changes, so you always know where you're at and what you're doing. Now originally, again, we were working with 16th notes. I'm going to show you one of the things that you can do to change these. So they were 16s before. I'm going to go ahead and change some of these to 8th notes. On top of that, what I'm also going to do is paste in another section here. Put this at the beginning, but I'm going to get rid of the root. And then paste in one more section. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the 5th. And make that a 4th. I believe that's a diminished 4th chord. Don't quote me because I'm not sure if I'm right or not. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And if you can hear that, what you've heard is I've actually kind of created music. I have my melody line and I have my harmony line. So in actuality, I do kind of have music. Now, I've not used a musical instrument of any sort, unless you can consider the computer a musical instrument, which in actuality I do. But what I have done is used a filter or a soft synth. I have used a measure 4 beats for that fact. I have used a scale, certain key, used chords of somewhat different types, and used different types of notes. The product of that, of course, is somewhat melodic, somewhat of a song. This concludes Lesson 1 of Newton's Laws of Music, MIDI edition. Thank you.